Something happened inside Washington's practice facility today that nobody saw coming, and Commanders fans, you need to hear every single word of it. Head coach Dan Quinn walked up to that podium in Ashburn, Virginia, and in the span of about 15 minutes, he admitted his team looked like it was in total disarray during the Detroit game, revealed a surprise decision to practice on a day they weren't even scheduled to, and dropped a center position update that has this fan base more confused than ever. Buckle up, because we are breaking down absolutely everything Dan Quinn said today, piece by piece, and trust me, there is a lot to unpack. But before we dive into this one, I need a quick favor from you. We are closing in on 2,000 subscribers on this channel, and we cannot get there without you. If you're watching this and you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, do it right now before you keep going, because every single subscriber gets us one step closer to that milestone and helps us keep bringing you this kind of daily, no-fluff Commanders breakdown. Okay, now let's get into everything Dan Quinn just said. Let's start with the surprise of the day. The Commanders were not originally scheduled to practice today, and yet out of nowhere, Dan Quinn called an audible and put his team back on the field. When reporters pressed him on why, Quinn explained that after reviewing the tape from Saturday's game against the Detroit Lions, he simply felt like this was a good opportunity to stack 3 practice days in a row heading into Wednesday's joint session with the Baltimore Ravens. He was quick to shoot down the idea that this was some kind of panicked, knee-jerk reaction to what he saw on film, but he didn't exactly hide his frustration either. Quinn admitted flat out that he didn't love everything he saw from what he called his team's identity standpoint during that Lions game. And when the head coach starts using the word identity in a sentence about disappointment, you know something deeper is bothering him. And folks, once Quinn really got going on breaking down that Detroit game, the honesty got a lot more brutal. He described the performance in one word that should worry every single Commanders fan out there: disarray. That's not spin. That's not coach speak. Dan Quinn looked reporters in the eye and said his football team played in disarray against the Lions. He pointed to a laundry list of issues: 4 separate penalties, miscommunication up front on the offensive line, a blown containment assignment that turned what should have been a manageable gain into a long, back-breaking touchdown run. Quinn broke down the exact play, a zone read option pitch that got away from the defense because the read got out of position and the pursuit simply wasn't fast enough to close it down. He didn't sugarcoat it either, admitting it could have easily been held to a first down. But instead, it turned into a touchdown, and that stings. What really seemed to bother Quinn wasn't just the mistakes themselves, but the timing of them. Just 1 week earlier, this same coaching staff was thrilled with how the offense closed out the 2-minute drill at the end of the first half and then sealed the game late with a strong 4-minute finish. Fast forward to this game against Detroit, and in almost identical situations, the execution completely fell apart. In that same 2-minute window before halftime, Washington had a tackle for loss, a short completion, and a sack, killing any real scoring chance. And in the 4-minute drill that should have salted away the game, the defense couldn't get a stop, and Detroit converted a critical 4th down to keep their comeback hopes alive. On top of all that, special teams penalties wrecked field position throughout the game. Put it all together, and you get exactly the kind of disjointed, uncharacteristic performance that pushed Dan Quinn to call an unscheduled practice and get his team back to work immediately. Now let's get to the story that has been the biggest lightning rod all summer long: the center position. And folks, brace yourselves, because Dan Quinn's answer today is going to spark just as much debate as ever. When directly asked whether he believes Washington has the talent it needs at center already on the roster, Quinn's answer was simple: yes, they do. But, and this is a massive but, he immediately followed that up by admitting there is still real work left to do at that position. Quinn said the team wants to see more out of rookie Matt Golden, who played some snaps at guard during the Detroit game before the team pulled him back to work him fully at center heading into this week. Meanwhile, veteran center Nick Allegretti remains out of the mix entirely as he continues working his way back from injury, still not fully cleared to jump back into that battle. So as of right now, according to Quinn's own words, this center competition remains a three-man puzzle between Allegretti, Golden, and Julian Good-Jones, and the coaching staff is still actively evaluating who gives this team the best path forward. When a reporter followed up and pushed Quinn specifically on what he needs to see from both Julian Good-Jones and Matt Golden going forward, his answer offered a little more clarity and, honestly, a little bit of reassurance. Quinn said he already feels good about where both players stand from a mental system knowledge standpoint. Both players, in his words, are heady, smart football players who understand the calls and know where to direct traffic up front, which matters enormously at the center position because that's the guy responsible for making protection calls before the snap. But knowledge of the playbook is only half the battle. Quinn made it clear that what he really wants to evaluate now is how both Good-Jones and Golden hold up in pass protection against pressure, specifically against blitzes and stunts, which both Washington's own defense and Baltimore's defense are notorious for bringing. Wednesday and Friday's joint practices and preseason matchup against the Ravens will give the coaching staff exactly that kind of live look before final decisions start coming into focus. Let's shift over to the injury report because there's actually some encouraging news mixed in with the usual training camp uncertainty. Defensive lineman Tim Settle is officially back on the field both today and set to travel with the team to Baltimore after missing a chunk of time. Running back Rachaad White is also progressing, working through individual sessions today as he continues his return. On the flip side, Bill Krosky-Merritt remains in a holding pattern, working off to the side with athletic trainers rather than practicing with the team, as Washington continues easing him back with hopes of getting him fully integrated into practices sometime next week. And then there's defensive lineman Deatrick Wise, who is working his way back from a serious knee injury. Quinn was careful not to put a firm timeline on Wise's return from the physically unable to perform list, but he did note that Wise has had a strong recent evaluation and is clearly getting closer, even if there's no exact date circled on the calendar just yet. Now here's a storyline that flew a little under the radar today but is worth watching closely. The competition for who wears the green dot on defense, essentially the on-field defensive play caller designation. According to Quinn, that decision is still very much ongoing, with linebackers Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner, referred to simply as Frankie and Sonny. Currently the two frontrunners who will likely rotate that responsibility between them throughout the season. Quinn even hinted that if one of those two comes off the field, veteran linebacker Von Miller, referenced as Leo, could step in and briefly hold that role as well. It's a small detail, but it speaks to just how much Washington values communication and leadership at the linebacker level heading into this season. Quinn also fielded a fascinating question about why the coaching staff has been flip-flopping backup quarterbacks Sam and Ethan Marcus. Let's be precise here. The plan involves rotating reps between the team's backup quarterback options rather than committing fully to one over the other. And Quinn's explanation for that decision was genuinely interesting. He said the coaching staff, after consulting with offensive coordinator David Blau and quarterbacks coach Danny Etling, both of whom have real NFL experience as backup quarterbacks themselves, wanted to simulate exactly what it's like for a backup to get thrown into a game cold, without extra setup time or extended practice reps. So instead of making things easy on these quarterbacks, Quinn openly admitted they are intentionally making it harder, forcing each guy to adapt on the fly with new teammates and different circumstances, because that's genuinely what the job of an NFL backup quarterback demands. Quinn was also asked to highlight players who have stood out throughout this competitive training camp, and his answer offered up a nice mix of encouraging names for Commanders fans to watch. On the offensive line, Quinn singled out Sam Cosmi and Josh Conerly Jr. for the work they put in this offseason to get bigger and stronger along with Chris Paul and Brandon Coleman, both of whom have taken on a heavy workload at guard, while starting left tackle Laramie Tunsil continues recovering from injury. At tight end, John Bates, referred to as Jiggs, has looked comfortable within the offense. At receiver, Quinn specifically praised the leap that Jalen Lane has taken, noting improved route running, noticeably better conditioning, and a player who has evolved from being viewed purely as a return specialist into a legitimate offensive weapon on top of his special teams value. On defense, Quinn pointed to linebacker Bob Liu, likely referencing a linebacker in that room, as well as praised the competitive fire from cornerbacks Marshawn Lattimore, referred to as Meek, and Mike Sainristil, describing both as players who show up every single day ready and hungry to battle. There was also a genuinely feel-good moment when Quinn was asked about his safety room, specifically praising Quan Martin for coming up with back-to-back interceptions and safety Talanoa Hufanga for delivering a monster hit that stopped a running back cold. Quinn explained that Washington has actually been deploying cornerback Jonathan Owens out of the slot in certain 3 safety looks, using him as a blitzer given his natural speed and physicality carried over from his special teams background. According to Quinn, what excites him most about that safety room isn't just one standout performer. It's that different players are stepping up and making winning plays on different days, which is exactly the kind of competitive depth a contending team needs heading into the regular season. Not everything was positive, though, when asked directly about the run game, and specifically why the offense couldn't replicate the explosive 160-yard rushing performance from the week before. Quinn didn't try to hide his disappointment. He explained that the issues weren't limited to one player or one position group. Instead, it was a series of small breakdowns spread across the entire unit. Offensive linemen occasionally getting off the ball late, tight ends missing their landmarks downfield, backs not finishing runs with the same burst through open space. Quinn specifically pointed to a blown outside toss play during the crucial 2-minute drill before halftime that turned into a tackle for loss instead of the explosive gain Washington was hoping to manufacture. In Quinn's own words, the run game simply didn't feel as connected as he was hoping to see, which lines up perfectly with that broader disarray narrative he used to describe the entire Detroit performance. Looking ahead, Quinn made it clear that this week, culminating in Friday's preseason finale against Baltimore, is going to remain at a genuinely heightened intensity level, not a gradual wind down. He explained that this stretch of camp is intentionally being used to simulate longer, more difficult drives in game-like situations, ramping practice snap counts up from 6 and 8 plays per drive all the way up into the 10 to 12 range, essentially building game stamina and situational execution before the real tapering begins next week. As for whether Jaden Daniels will actually see the field in Friday's preseason finale against Baltimore, Quinn wouldn't commit to a definitive answer just yet, but he did confirm that Wednesday's joint practice with the Ravens will lean much more heavily toward getting extended reps for Daniels and the rest of the starting offensive personnel, compared to the more evenly balanced joint practice reps Washington ran against Miami earlier in camp. So there you have it, Commanders fans, an incredibly candid, occasionally uncomfortable, but genuinely informative press conference from Dan Quinn. On one hand, you've got a head coach openly admitting his football team looked disjointed and out of sync against Detroit, calling out specific breakdowns in protection, run blocking, and special teams discipline. On the other hand, you've got real signs of progress and competitive fire showing up across multiple position groups, from the safety room to the offensive line to the receiver corps. And smack in the middle of it all, that center position battle remains completely unresolved, with Julian Good-Jones and Matt Golden both still very much in the mix as this coaching staff continues digging for answers before Week 1 arrives. All right, it's your turn to weigh in. Drop a comment down below and let me know exactly what stood out to you most from Dan Quinn's press conference today. Are you encouraged by the honesty about the disarray against Detroit, or does it worry you heading into the regular season? And when it comes to that center battle, who do you trust more right now, Julian Good-Jones or Matt Golden? Sound off in the comments because I want to hear every single one of your takes. And before you go, I've got one more ask for you. If breaking down every single word from today's press conference helped you understand exactly what's happening inside Commanders training camp right now, do me a favor and smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button before you leave. We are working every single day to bring you this kind of detailed, straight to the point Commanders coverage completely free, and getting to 2,000 subscribers is our next big goal as a channel. You watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing right now is exactly how we get there. So don't wait, do it right now. Thank you all so much for watching, Commanders Nation. Until next time, let's go raise some hail.